Welcome to another episode of Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes, and today we are on our 18th in-depth character review where we are looking at Ima-Gun. Now, a lot of you guys have been asking, can we have a Jedi Week special? And this week, that is all we are doing. 2 weeks ago, we had a Bounty Hunter special for Boba Fett, IG-88, and Dengar. Last week, we had a Rogue One special where I released a lot of content of the Rogue One exclusive characters that just came out. And this week, it is all about Jedi. But before we talk about Ima-Gun, let's go ahead, pull up the Hall of Fame, and see where we stand so far. In our last review, we looked at the exclusive Cassian Andor because EA lent me that character, and we placed him in the Master category. Where will the fierce Ima-Gun fall in our Hall of Fame today? Well, stay tuned, and we will soon find out how this Jedi General falls in our table. And before we get started, I just want to give Doriana a quick shout out for providing the gameplay, since they have a lot of the Jedi maxed out, and as a lot of you know, they have provided some gameplay a few times in the past. So thank you once again for providing this content for us to check out. And as always, let's go ahead and briefly talk about Ima-Gun because he had a very brief appearance in the Clone Wars. And what we know of Ima-Gun is that he was a Jedi Master who was born on the planet of Kintan and served as a general in the Grand Army of the Republic during the Clone Wars. Out of his short story in the Clone Wars series, we found out he had a great aptitude for military strategy when approaching his last stand alongside his troops. During this last stand, we saw his strength in the Force when taking on the numerous droids and his will in fighting until he took his very last breath. And a very fun fact, one of the creators of the Clone Wars said his name was purposely formed to sound like I'm gonna die in order to reflect his ultimate fate he had in the Clone Wars. So if you think it sounds very similar, it was intentionally made that way. So a very funny story about that. But with that very brief introduction of Ima-Gun, let's go ahead and talk about how we unlock this character. And fortunately, you can get this guy through a lot of ways. One of the first ways you can get him is by participating in the Dark Side Hard Battle, more specifically 5A, as well as the Light Side Battle, 7C. He's also seen in one of the later Cantina battles at 7E. You can also get him in the guild store. For 400 guild tokens, you can go ahead and get 5 shards of Ima-Gun. And lastly, we also have the Bronzium packs. I don't mention Bronzium packs all that much, but you can actually get Ima-Gun very frequently from the Bronzium packs. I actually got him close to 6 stars straight from Bronzium packs before I farmed the rest of his shards through the guild store. But after knowing how to unlock this character, which is fairly easily to be honest, let's go ahead and talk about what's good about this character, what's the average, and what is bad about the character before even looking at mods and abilities. And we find a story in this character. Just like IG-88, numbers don't tell the full thing, but on paper, Ima-Gun proves to be great in a lot of things. So let's go ahead and check them out. In terms of pros, we see that he is number 8 in maximum damage. The average maximum damage in this game is 5,453, and Ima-Gun is actually at 7,839, so very high numerically speaking, which puts him in the top 10%. Now let's talk about the close relative of maximum damage and talk about the maximum basic damage. In terms of maximum basic damage, we see Ima-Gun as number 22. The average is 4,251, and Ima-Gun is going to be actually 4,888, which puts him in the top 25% in this game. And this also does not consider the numbers against a droid enemy, because as we will soon find out, this number actually increases depending on the type of enemy that he faces. So we are actually starting off strong here. We got 2 great stats in the pros. What about defensive stuff? And we see that Ima-Gun is actually number 29 in health. The average health in this game is 19,166, and Ima-Gun, as I've said, he's number 29, where he is rocking 22,597. So very strong so far, looking pretty good because that puts him in the top 30%. A close sibling of health, let's go ahead and look at protection, where he is number 31. The average in this category is 19,617, and Ima-Gun is really great in this category at 24,255, roughly the top 30% as well. Continuing on with the story of defensive abilities, let's look at armor, where he is number 22. The average in armor is 227, and Ima-Gun is at 256, so definitely above that, which puts him in the top 25%. And the last thing I want to quickly mention is that he has 10% health steal, which is always a great thing in my book. Now, we talked about the pros, and what about the average? And we find that he's average in a couple of things here. Specifically, he is number 45 in speed. The average is 127, and Ima-Gun dies at 125. So ever so below that, but he still is in the top 50% in speed. Getting on to potency, not the most important thing for him, but he is number 57 in this category. The average is 30%, and Ima-Gun die is 29%, which puts him in the bottom 50%, but again, not too important, but he does apply defense down, as we will soon find out. And then the last thing in this category is armor penetration. How hard will it be for him to get through thick armor like Old Ben, Sunfac, Short Trooper, all those characters? And we see that he's okay here. He's number 49, with the average being 53, and Ima-Gun die is 46, putting him in the top 50%. Now, let's go ahead and talk about the stuff that makes Chewbacca want to cry. But guess what? There's nothing really to cry about in terms of the major stats. When we look at the cons, numerically speaking, there's nothing too significant. Yeah, I mean, if you go to those very minor stats that no one really knows about or no one really cares about, you might find something. But in terms of all the major stats that I just listed, there's nothing. I think that's one of the first characters that has no major con when we just look at the straight numbers. But let's go ahead and transition over to the kit, where we start putting these numbers into perspective. Ima-Gun Die's kit revolves around his story on how he fights extra hard against droid enemies and how he defends his allies so they survive as long as possible, so they can give every ounce of effort to try and win the battle. And the first ability that he has, which is his basic, is called Sunder. This deals physical damage to a target enemy with a 50% chance to inflict defense down for 2 turns. If the target is a droid, he deals 100% more damage and has a 100% chance to inflict defense down if that person is a droid. As we mentioned, when looking at the straight numbers, we see that this is a decent basic attack, which deals about 4,424 to 4,888, but it's not the most interesting or most devastating basic, but does come in handy against a droid squad at times because you will do double that damage essentially. But when considering basics of other characters after mods and abilities are kind of put into the equation, we see that this attack is kind of underwhelming in a way. But let's look at the next ability, which is called Rebuke, and we see that this deals physical damage to a target enemy and it grants all allies defense up for 3 turns, and this is his maximum damage ability right here, where he does about 7,093 to about 7,839. So on paper, yeah, this looks like pretty good damage, but it's a very basic Star Wars Galaxy of Hero ability that has not evolved much since the game came out. Numerically, it is very high, but there are many basic attacks from others that do way more damage than his special. Defense up is generally also seen as not the most useful buff, and I'm pretty sure most people would agree they would rather have something over defense up as the buff he grants. So in terms of his basic and his special, nothing too amazing that makes you want to jump out of your seat, but his leader ability called Jedi Strategist is a ton of fun. All allies gain 30 defense, and Jedi allies gain 35% counter chance and a 25% counter damage, which that's pretty cool. A very fun leader ability, and is sort of a minor General Kenobi ability. Definitely one of my favorite abilities in the game because it's just so much fun to use. Might not be the best, but it's definitely a lot of fun to use. And it can be a great leader ability in an AoE meta like we still are kind of in. But do keep in mind that 35% counter chance is not the highest percentage, although someone like Aayla Secura would absolutely love that extra 35% counter chance to always counter when someone hits them. And again, the extra defense is not the most preferred buff, but hey, it's better than nothing, but of course not as good as offense up because that increases your damage per second in the game. And the last thing we have to look at here is called the Last Stand. Ima-Gun Die recovers 15% of his max health each turn for 3 turns when he suffers a critical hit. Now, this was not as useful in the past, but in today's world, it actually will be triggered quite a lot when you have characters like droids, Lando, who are just spamming AoE critical damage, Biggs and Wedge, they're everywhere, so this will actually happen. And before mods, he would actually gain roughly 3,900 health per turn after he is critically hit for 3 turns. So not the most special unique out there, but it will be triggered quite often, so do keep that in mind. After getting the kit out of the way, let's go ahead and take a peek at the gear before we get to the subjective part of the review, and he's actually looking okay in this category. When we look at raid gear, we all know that the average raid gear is 3, and everyone can get the tier 11 nowadays, but the good thing is, Ima-Gun Die does not actually need raid gear until he is gear 9, and he only needs 1 piece. Only 7 other characters are like that, so very unique and very good in that regards, and that 1 piece he needs is the Mark 7 Nubian Scanner. Now gold, it's not as peachy of a story, the average is 200 pieces needed, and Ima-Gun Dai is going to need 440 pieces. So definitely above the average, but the good news is he only needs one Mark 8 biotech implant to get from gear 10 to gear 11, and that's the most important thing. So he's not like Cassian Andor where he needs a lot of gold gear before he gets to gear 11. So very good in that regards, but still in the grand scheme of things, definitely needs more than the average person. Alright, and the purple gear. How many nights will you have to cry yourself to sleep when you're gearing up this character? And we see that, you know, he's just on average pretty much. The average amount of pieces needed is 1,110, and Ima-Gun Dai needs 1,005 pieces, so just under that average. And he needs mostly a variety of purple gear, nothing too much of one piece, but the most frequent piece he will need is the Mark III Carbonite sensor arrays, which he needs about 250 pieces of those. So keep that in mind. And lastly, blue, green, white gear. Nothing too crazy. He's below average on blue and green, but slightly above average for white gear. He needs about 20 more pieces of white gear, but again, white pieces are quite easy to come around. Okay, let's get to the fun part of the reviews where we talk about my subjective ideas about this character, my tips, recommendations, Yoda's checklist, his best friends, mortal enemies, all that great stuff. But let's talk about the thoughts first. Firstly, Ima-Gun Dai's leader ability is a ton of fun and one of the more useful Jedi leaders, especially for phase 1 of the AAT raid and for the Yoda event as well. Aside from that, he is a very basic, plain character and doesn't impress much when looking beyond the numbers. Ima-Gun Dai is kind of the opposite of IG-88's review, where the numbers look good in theory, but in application he is not the most impressive character. In the grand scheme of things, when you look at mods and abilities, which are probably more important than the solid numbers, which is why we look at both of them, because they complement each other and sometimes they counteract each other or tell a totally different story. The numbers look strong, but he has just failed to evolve much kit-wise, which is why you do not see him too often, and when you do see him, it most likely will never be outside of a leader role. He's pretty much only used as a leader, and that's it. He is fun and a great beginner character, but will start to lose some of his viability later in the game once protection and mods become a bigger thing, and you won't really see him in other squads like Anakin, Qui-Gon Jinn, and now General Kenobi, who is starting to become more frequent in the top end of Arena. So kind of long story short about Ima-Gun Dai, he is not the most versatile Jedi. If Ima-Gun Dai did not have the leader ability, he would probably never be used at all, because unlike other Jedi where if you take away one ability, they still have many other great ones, and Qui-Gon Jinn and Anakin are one of those characters that you take one away, they still have so much other stuff to fall back on, and Ima-Gun Dai just has one thing that's going for him, and that's mainly that leader ability, which is, it's a great one, and it makes the game a lot of fun when you do use him. So just a few more fun things before we get to the Hall of Fame. A lot of you guys asked if we can dedicate a small segment of the video, kind of like how we have a best friend segment. You guys want to hear what's the best counter for characters, so I'm starting a mortal enemy segment. And in terms of mortal enemies for Ima-Gun Dai, there are a lot of them. It's mainly a lot of dark side characters like Darth Maul. If he can apply daze to all of the Jedi that he's leading, he's pretty much useless, I think. You can't do anything if you can't counterattack. That's what daze does. It prevents counterattacks. Palpatine, applying shock, stunning them. Palpatine has a lot of stuff against Jedi, and Ima-Gun Dai would hate that. Same thing with Dooku. If Dooku's stunning, he's doing all that crazy stuff on the field against Jedi, they're pretty much rendered useless at that point. But pretty much anyone that can stun him or his allies or prevent them from countering are great choices against him. Now, with all that scary talk of his mortal enemies, what about his best friends? Who is he staying up late at night to send funny pictures and cat memes? Well, I'll tell you right away. Aayla Secura and Yoda are by far his favorite friends. Aayla Secura is going to constantly counterattack under an Ima-Gun Dai's lead, and Yoda, if he can counterattack, he's gaining foresight way more often, and in turn, he can share that more frequently with his squad. So by far his favorites, and pretty much the only best friends he has are just Jedis. Qui-Gon Jinn, Ahsoka, Anakin. He doesn't really fit or work well with anyone outside of Jedi, which is quite sad because I would have loved to see him benefiting clones as well. Kind of like General Kenobi, as we saw in the Clone Wars, Ima-Gun Dai was leading his clones as a great leader. And let's talk about mods real quick. I'll go ahead and show you what Doriana had on their Ima-Gun Dai. You can tell that they were just throwing some random mods on because they are using him for other characters, but pretty much what I would recommend is giving him either a health mod set, because that's my preferred one, just make him even more tankier, but you could also use critical chance, critical damage mods to try and amplify his damage that on paper is numerically pretty stable. And for primary and secondary mods, you definitely want to bump up his speed for sure so he can attack more. Protection is also great since he has very high protection. Getting that up even higher is spectacular. And potency is not really a huge concern. If you can't apply defense down, it's not the end of the world. So don't worry if his potency is not too high, unless you really want that to apply for sure. And lastly, before we get to the Hall of Fame, let's talk about Yoda's do or do not checklist, and we quickly summarize all of the events in the game and talk about if he is good or not. In Arena, just because of that leader ability, I have to say do. He makes a full Jedi team very viable before General Kenobi comes around. Galactic War, just like Arena, it's a ton of fun. If you want to have fun in Galactic War, and Ima-Gun lead is by far one of the best and most fun ones. Light side battles, of course, if you could do the previous two, you can also do light side battles. And just like Cantina battles, if you're using him as a leader, of course, go ahead and do that. But outside of the leader role, you probably won't see him be well in any of those categories. So all of those are due just because of his leader. Ima-Gun is also used for the mod challenges, more specifically the defense mod. So you can say do, although there are better Jedi, but Ima-Gun lead is always a ton of fun. Heist. Last time I checked, Ima-Gun is a pretty clean guy, so he will not be robbing banks for you. The Yoda challenge, only specific to Jedi, and there are a lot of Jedi in the game, and you can only bring in 5 to take on Yoda. And Ima-Gun would actually be a really great choice if, of course, you are using him as the leader. He's better than other characters like Old Ben against Yoda, so Ima-Gun actually does pretty well for this. Next is ships, and it's a do not. He does not have any ship in the game, but hey, that could change in the future since he is a general, so who knows? The Rancor raid, I'm gonna say do not. He's more of a strong 3rd or 4th string leader, but he is definitely not the must-have. The Rancor raid's all about turn meter removal, which he has absolutely 0 for, and he will not solo the raid for you, that's for sure. AAT raid, definitely do. He is great for phase 1. Getting all those counterattacks from those massive AoE damage attacks from the droids is great. Getting more damage against General Grievous and the droids with him is also great. So 100% do for this category. And alright, that's it. Let's go ahead and pull up the Hall of Fame and see where we stand with Ima-Gun. And from Grandmaster to Youngling, Ima-Gun is going to fall in the Knight category. He is too much of a one ability use character because of just his leader ability and does not adapt too well outside of his leader role. But as a leader for Jedi, he makes things a lot of fun and starts to make a full Jedi team pretty competitive in Arena until you reach characters like General Kenobi. But there you have it, folks. I hope you enjoyed this review of Ima-Gun, and if you want to see more Jedi, please let me know down below who should be the next ones this week, because I want to get a couple more Jedi on the Hall of Fame before we end the week. And as always, if you're enjoying the content, please throw me a like and subscribe for more awesome stuff in the future. And we will talk again soon, my friends. Peace out.